a lot of our history is hidden because I just think people don't know how to talk about it. The Haskell House is a way to introduce and to talk about this history.
A history that you can reach out and you can touch.
The most tangible thing we have of what Clarksville used to be like. So welcome everybody to the Haskell House. So this house is the oldest house in Clarksville. We think it was built sometime between 1875 and 1879, so a long, long time ago. And it was built by a former slave by the name of Peter Tucker.
Stepping into the Haskell House takes you on a trip back through time. Built just after the Civil War, it's one of the few structures still standing as a symbol of the historic roots and hard-fought struggles of Texas freedom colonies. Communities like Clarksville were settled by formerly enslaved people and provided a safe space where they could live independent, self-sustaining lives on their own property. The Haskell House showcases Clarksville's earliest architecture. Simple board and batten homes provided the most basic shelter for newly freed families during Reconstruction, when Southern states were ordered to give formerly enslaved people legal and political rights.
And it has two front doors because people in Clarksville were really, really poor. And they needed to make money however they could. So one of the things they did was they took in boarders or renters.
One of the early boarders here was a veteran named Hezekiah Haskell, who served the Union during the Civil War. After emancipation, he joined the Buffalo Soldiers, a term coined by indigenous peoples to describe the all-black Army regiments who were deployed to expand white settlement into native territories along the western frontier.
He fell in love with the Smith's daughter, Catherine. And so they ended up getting married. The Smiths deeded the house to them ultimately.
Hezekiah Haskell Sr. and his wife Catherine lived in the house for decades.
After they died, then Hezekiah Haskell Jr., also known as Kai, he lived in the house. He was kind of known as a curmudgeon.
A close-knit group of Haskell's descendants grew up in Clarksville near the house. They have vivid memories of the curmudgeonly man they called Uncle Kai.
He was very set in his ways. He was very strict.
And we used to walk in the backyard to Uncle Haskell. And we used to go on his trees and steal his plums and his figs.
The Haskell House was behind my granddaddy's house. And we was kids. We couldn't go through his yard to get his figs. If you got caught in that yard, you got to walk through it. You by my Uncle Kai.
And then Uncle Kai, get out of my yard, he used to say, get out of my yard. Y'all stop traveling in my yard.
Didn't have no electricity. He had kerosene candles. Didn't have no heat. You know, he had a little hole in the wall. It dug in the ground. That's what he kept his heat with, and that's how he lived. It came up to be the 60s and the 70s. He was still living that way. He didn't change.
The house was in bad shape and still without electricity or indoor plumbing when Kai Haskell died in 1976. The Haskell heirs decided to donate it to the city of Austin. The original plan was to move the old home, but it's documented and detailed in family lore that the spirit of old Kai Haskell didn't take too kindly to that idea.
It was a guy that was working construction, and he went to go do the house, to put the house on a crane. And when he got ready to put the house on a crane, my Uncle Kai visited him the night before at his house.
He said that ghost hunted him at his house and told him do not move that blank house.
And told him, boy, leave my house alone. Okay, the guy he thought he was dreaming or whatever. Then after that, the next day, the guy was getting ready to pull the house away, but he didn't because Uncle Kai came to him again, slammed him against the wall, threw a dresser on him, and told him, leave my house alone.
He told the construction worker, I'm not going back in the house, I'm not touching it.
And to this day, that house has not been moved. It will not be moved because Uncle Kai came from his grave and told him, do not touch my house. And that's the honest God truth. It's in the States, American Statesman's.
An Austin American Statesman story does indeed quote a Clarksville volunteer who describes not one, but two close encounters with the ghost of Kai Haskell, as the workers attempted to relocate the ramshackle house for restoration. So the Haskell House still sits where it was originally built on Watterson Avenue in Clarksville. Once in city hands, indoor plumbing and an air conditioning unit were added, and the home was reconstructed to resemble its early days. It's a designated Texas Historic Landmark and a City of Austin Historic Landmark. For years, the house hosted one of many senior lunch programs through the Austin Parks and Recreation Department. Today, the backyard serves the neighborhood as Clarksville's community gardens.
Well, this past year we spent a lot of time working with Parks and Rec on rehabilitating the exterior of the house. It needed a complete facelift. And so then after we finished the facelift, we're like, well, we need to reintroduce the house to the neighborhood. You can see what I say when I say it was ramshackle and run down.
The Haskell House now operates as a museum, open to the public, where people can learn about the important role this home in the Clarksville Freedom Colony played in the history of Austin.
I find that when people come here and they go inside and they look at the photos on the walls and they see what this building looks like and that people actually lived in that building and in that one room, they start to appreciate more the history of Black people in Clarksville and in Austin in general.
The history of Haskell House is carved into the soil of Clarksville, one of Austin's oldest neighborhoods.
One of the benefits is it now attracts people. It's like, well, what's this about? You know, and people walk by sometimes and they're like, we've always wondered about this house. And the door's open, well, come on in, you know, learn about Clarksville.
Much of current Clarksville was once part of Woodlawn, a 365-acre plantation owned by former Governor Elijah Marshall Pease and his wife, Lucadia. The Pease Mansion still stands in West Austin today. According to oral history, the quarters for people who labored at Woodlawn were located somewhere in Clarksville area. After emancipation, Pease and other landowners offered some of their acreage for sale to newly freed people. One of them was Charles Clark.
Some of Clarksville is a result of land that was sold or given to Charles Clark, who decided that he would offer the land to other freed blacks. And so Charles Clark actually established Clarksville in 1871.
Life today in this expensive West Austin neighborhood is vastly different than it was in the late 1800s, when formerly enslaved people experienced freedom for the first time and built a new life for themselves in Clarksville.
It was a subsistence life. It was not an easy life. People didn't have money. They had one another, and they had their church, and they had their freedom.
It was a life of people who were farmers, people who were domestics, folks who grew their own produce, raised their livestock.
From its humble beginnings to challenges of discrimination and gentrification, the people in this historic Black neighborhood showed great strength of character and conviction. In 1928, the all-white Austin City Council adopted a comprehensive plan to move all African Americans to East Austin. It was a way to legally segregate the city and retain control of valuable Central Austin land. If people didn't move, they were denied city utilities and services. Despite that pressure to move east, most Clarksville families didn't budge.
The tenacity of the residents to stay in this community when so many other Black Austinites who lived in freedmen's communities, especially outside of East Austin, what became the Negro District, you know, so many left their communities to move east. Anyway, these folks stayed.
And for decades, they paid a high price for staying.
Streets weren't paved. There were no sidewalks. There weren't sewers. There weren't streetlights. You know, nothing that all of the surrounding neighborhoods had.
The lack of city services continued into the 1970s, but it still failed to force out many devoted Clarksville families. Neither did closing their beloved schoolhouse, The small Clarksville Colored School offered an education to the neighborhood's children from the 1880s until 1964, when the city closed the school in an effort to integrate nearby white schools.
May have been in the 5th grade when they shut Clarksville down. They sent us to Matthews. And for Matthews, they put us in different places and different areas.
But through all of the challenges and changes, the Clarksville neighbors were determined to chart their own course, much like their ancestors did.
And this idea of people who are enslaved finally getting this chance to have their own freedom and what that meant to them, and have their children living free and having land and being able to go where they want to go, when they want to go, do the work that they want to do. Like, the power of that, it's in the soil. Like, that's not going anywhere. And so that's why folks, are fighting continuously, have fought and will fight, around this legacy.
The history of Clarksville is near and dear to Stephanie Lang and her mother, Diane Gilmore Lang. Their roots run deep here, going back several generations.
So when you drive around Clarksville today, what comes to mind? I mean, it's a much different place, right?
It is so different, and I have mixed feelings. I have nostalgia. I have feelings of what the people who lived here and saw all of this happen. I have not positive thoughts about Austin, the city council, the mayor, and all the folks that destroyed lives and homes and in the name of progress.
And now we're trying to get together and trying to build our community up, and now they want to tear it down, putting it on the highway through here.
Clarksville's tenacity was tested once again when the Mopac Highway was proposed along the Missouri Pacific Railroad line.
The Mopac's going first, down the railroad.
How many families will that affect?
It will affect somewhere around, just in that area, probably 18 or 20 families.
Now, has any plans been made for these families?
Not at all.
Not at all?
Not at all.
Kai Haskell was among the neighbors speaking out against a highway crisscrossing Clarksville.
Mm-hmm. Your property, you don't want to pay you nothing for it. No. Ain't worth. Or stove up, room of kitchen. No way in the world make you sell your homestead for a highway.
But efforts to stop Mopac failed. Before the expressway was built, the community stretched west beyond the railroad tracks. By the time it was finished, a third of the neighborhood was wiped out. Lives were uprooted, and Clarksville was forever changed.
When Mopac was built, it kind of opened up Clarksville. A lot of people didn't realize Clarksville was there. And so it really seemed to speed up that gentrification. And so for a lot of people, it was a very dangerous, the children played in the streets, and it was very small, close-knit community. And then all of a sudden now you have all these people cutting through this community.
And I remember, I was little, but I remember cars used to come by, and they look and they'll say, who is these people? Because most of the surrounding areas was white, and we were the black community.
I don't know that that was an effort to get rid of Clarksville, but then the Crosstown Expressway certainly was. Crosstown Expressway was going to go from the east side to the west side, would connect to Mopac, and the plan was it was going to go up 15th Street, and then it was going to zig over, which would cost more money, really, than just going straight down to 15th Street, zig over right through the heart of Clarksville. And that way, that's problem solved. We get rid of everybody. Mary Baylor and Pauline Brown, who were two very powerful women in the neighborhood, they decided they were going to fight.
Thanks to the dedication and determination of Pauline Brown and Mary Frances Baylor, along with help of then Congressman J.J. Jake Pickle, the Crosstown Expressway was defeated and never built.
Well, I just know how much they sacrificed and how much they put into, stopping the Crosstown, fighting against Mopac, even just keeping Clarksville, kind of going.
These two women taught the people in Clarksville that they had a voice, that they had political power, and that they could speak up and change things for themselves, make things better.
Mary Baylor was so loved and respected by her neighbors that the park built on the site of the old Clarksville School bears her name. Though she, Pauline Brown, and others rallied the troops, some of their hard-fought victories were short-lived. When the city finally started providing services and paving roads, it made Clarksville more desirable to developers. So they began buying up property in this lovely little neighborhood so close to downtown. It was soon evident even the collective power and passion of longtime Clarksville residents wasn't strong enough to stave off gentrification. In her life story, Pauline Brown wrote, "I found something called gentrification was slowly eroding our way of life. The high-end homes that developers were building in Clarksville were gradually displacing the working people that had called it home all their lives. The majority of them had no ideas about the real history of the neighborhood and the feeling of community that kept neighbors helping each other." In an attempt to keep Clarksville's character and slow down displacement, the Clarksville Community Development Corporation was formed in 1978. The CCDC still works to protect Clarksville history and architecture. The group also runs an affordable housing program for low-income families to encourage racial, ethnic, and economic diversity. Despite those efforts, today's neighborhoods bear little resemblance to the quiet, agrarian Clarksville of the past. Most of the descendants of Charles Clark and Hezekiah Haskell have moved on. But this special place they once called home still brings back happy memories.
Clarksville, this community, there's no community like it because it's very close-knit.
The neighbors, they raised us. If I did something on the hill, my mama knew it before I got home.
There was a whole saying of, it take a village to raise a child. Well, this community here, it was a village.
But this community makes me feel safe. I mean, from a little girl up to now. And we all wish we could afford to live in Clarksville. But now it's too expensive.
We love being in Clarksville because this was our home and still our home. I come to visit church all the time because it's my home. I love the people. I love everybody that is a community. White, black, Spanish, didn't matter. We were community and we were family.
Growing up in Clarksville was great though. We grew up so close, like brothers and sisters almost. We looked out for each other. There was more love in the community then. There's more love in the community. But things have changed.
Throughout the years, the heart and soul of Clarksville has always been Sweet Home Missionary Baptist Church. The cornerstone of this community held its early services at the Haskell House.
Because the people who lived in Clarksville were very religious people, they established a church, but they didn't have money to build a church, much less buy land for a church. So initially, church services were held here in this house, and then eventually they got the money to buy the land. I think they paid $50 for the land where the church is now.
It was the center for communication. It was the center for meeting. It was the center for strength. It was the center for unity and the center for community.
In Sweet Home's congregation today, you'll find members whose ties to this church go back many generations to those early settlers of Clarksville. They travel from all over Central Texas to worship here on Sunday mornings where their ancestors did.
I walk in Sweet Home, it makes me feel like all of my ancestors just wrap their arms around me. Where I sit now is where my mother sat. And when I sit there, I just feel like she's giving me a big hug. And all my other ancestors are giving me a big hug. That's how I feel.
My grandfather preached at this church for 17 years, Reverend L.J. Griffin. And that's Charles Clark's great-great-great-great nephew. is home. Just like family members talk, Hattie said, we home. Like Hattie said, she sits in a seat where her mother sit. I sit in the seat where my mother sit. I feel home. It's just home.
The church was all what we had. We did BTU meeting, Bible study, choir rehearsal, Sunday school. Everything was here to stay. And the Baylors and the Browns and the Thompsons and the Griffith, they all had us downstairs. We sung here, we preached here.
I used to see this bell right here. I used to hold my grandfather's leg when he ring it, when the descendants, the elders passed away. They used the bell. I was just a baby.
That bell was the bell my cousin was talking about. They ring that bell. Dun, dun. When everyone died, anyone died in the family or in the community, they ring that bell. We know someone had died in the church family.
Oh, I love it. I wouldn't go to any other church. This church just got central air and heat. Like last year, we grew up with the windows up. When I was a little girl, the windows were up. You could hear the choir all the way down the road. It was beautiful.
Nobody has to be here. Nobody has to be here. But we have a love for the Lord. They have a love and a sense of unity and the connection with their families.
She said, well, there was about 100 people standing outside.
That connection is great. My part, as far as perpetuating and keeping things going from a spiritual basis, from a servitude basis, is rewarding.
Whether serving as Clarksville's first place of worship or providing shelter for a family experiencing freedom for the first time, Haskell House has endured the test of time for close to 150 years. It's a visible reminder of the sacrifice, struggles, and strength of the people who built this community. In 2004, community activist Pauline Brown wrote, "Clarksville is slowly losing the African Americans whose ancestors founded it as freedmen. But Kai Haskell's house still stands just as proudly as ever." As the doors to this proud home stay open for future generations,
These are old Clarksville houses.
the rich history here will hopefully open hearts and minds.
History can be a little bit boring sometimes for kids, and it's just this distant story of people. And I really wanted them to know that history was also individuals who lived close by that had fascinating lives. And especially here in Austin, in the Clarksville neighborhood, we had this community of Black people who lived dignified lives, who sought to create a safe community for themselves, and who thrived.
Very interesting to learn about history that happened really close to where we go to school now.
I thought it was really good, cool and good that they were trying to stay and fighting for where they or pretty much their history was, and it was really special to them.
That photo.
I think it's important because the slaves came here and settled their own neighborhood in Texas, and they persevered through all of the hardship they were put in, and they didn't give up so they could preserve their history.
So it's just this vestige of a totally different lifestyle and a totally different culture, and that's why it's so important, because it's part of the people who lived here in this neighborhood. They helped build Austin. They made Austin what it is.
So when people visit the Haskell House, I hope they could get a sense of history by just looking at the dimensions of the house and then looking at the pictures and learning that, one, they were real people. Two, there was a connection with those real people. Three, there were smiles on the faces. They will know that it served a vital part of the community.